to WUSB 90.1 FM. And our guest today is Dr. Stephen Hassan. And he is the author of The Cult of Trump. A leading cult expert explains how the president uses mind control. And it was originally published in 2019 by the Free Press, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. He is also the author of Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, and Releasing the Bonds. He's a licensed mental health professional, a recognized expert on cults and undue influences, and possesses professional experience both in the U.S. and abroad. Dr. Hassan, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think a good place for us to start is for people to sort of understand how you came to being involved in the subject of cults, because it's something that has evolved over the years. And I think the best way to start is for you to explain what your original experience was and how that unfolded and ultimately ended in terms of your participation.
Sure. Basically, I was a upper junior at Queens College, studying poetry, creative writing, and I experienced a recruitment into a cult group called the Moonies that a lot of young people don't know what it's about, but Moon claimed to be the Messiah and claimed to have supernatural powers, and I was systematically indoctrinated and programmed, became a full-time member and leader, dropped out of college, quit my job, became a right-wing fascist, did things like fast for Richard Nixon during Watergate, just to give a flavor for how much of a radical change of my identity happened. And my family and friends freaked out and all tried to argue me out of it or persuade me it was a bad group and was a cult, which was completely not only not effective, but it drove me deeper into the belief system of the cult. At that point, I was already indoctrinated. But I got out after a near fatal van crash due to sleep deprivation and then a voluntary deprogramming, not because I had any doubts at all. I didn't consciously, but I wanted to prove to my family I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. And so, and I had a cast on my leg from my toes to my groin and was of no use to the group at that point till I recovered. So, but by the end of the 5 agreed upon days, I learned about brainwashing, Chinese communist brainwashing of the 50s, and I started to realize that my mind had been hacked. And at that point, I just felt ashamed, embarrassed, confused, wanted to understand what happened to me, and I started reading the literature on brainwashing and mind control and sought out experts who had been studying it in the 50s and 60s, and they encouraged me to have a career explaining my experience to others because what I experienced was far more sophisticated than what they studied. And here I am, 49 years later. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have 49 years of experience helping people get out of all types of cults, religious cults, political cults, therapy cults, commercial cults like trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking cults, and did my doctoral dissertation on how to update the legal system regarding the topic of undue influence, because unfortunately, the law is about 100 years out of date with understanding the human mind and social psychology and neuroscience. So that's my life work. And as you said, I wrote The Cult of Trump in 2019, and it got re-released in just before the last election with a foreword by George Conway, the conservative lawyer, former husband of Kellyanne Conway, and an afterword by myself.
Okay. And, and just to be clear, when you say the Moonies, that's the Unification Church of the United States. That's kind of the official
No,
term
it's
of who they are,
actually
I believe.
not the official title anymore of the cult, but the
Oh,
media likes to use it. I'm Jewish. I never would have joined a church. They have hundreds of different front organizations. The latest big organization they use is the World Family Federation for Peace
okay.
and Unification. And there's a schism that took place. Moon died in 2012. And there are two sons of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Chahan. She took over the main group. But these two sons are in Pennsylvania. One has an arms factory, and one has an AR-15 cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries that was going around the country with Michael Flynn before the last election, doing Rod of Iron freedom festivals, recruiting people to be members of a militia group to kill people who are going to be opponents to the takeover of the cult of Trump.
Okay. Just kind of just step back a little bit, and some of this terminology, for us who are lay people, it's, you hopefully you can enlighten us. So you were involved in what would be called deprogramming to get you out of the cult. Is it first of all, is that correct?
Yeah, so the term deprogramming was coined in the 70s by Ted Patrick, who was basically abducting people or holding them against their will to kind of snap them out of their cult involvement. When I got deprogrammed, it was voluntary. And when I got out, many families approached me to help their loved ones. And back in 76, some judges were giving 1 week conservatorships to their person's parents. So a number of the cases I did or were legal cases where we had legal guardianship. But after a number of months, the ACLU got involved and cults got involved to lobby. And so judges stopped granting those. And I retired from forcible deprogrammings or involuntary deprogrammings, but I still wanted to help people who had been programmed. So we started doing voluntary, what we called exit counselings. And over the decades, when the internet was created, it changed everything to the point where people could get information on their own through the internet, find ex-members, etc. And I evolved a more advanced technique I call the strategic interactive approach, where basically I'm educating family, friends, ex-members how to talk to current cult members in a way that makes them reality test. And so, chapter 9 of The Cult of Trump is my chapter on how to help family and friends who've been radicalized into the cult of Trump or QAnon or any number of other cults associated with the cult of Trump.
Okay. So mine. I'm
What
sorry.
what makes a political movement different than a cult, and why is it that you've picked out one particular political movement to identify as cult-like?
So that's a good question. So what I want to explain for you, and they can go to my website, freedomofmind.com, and look at my graphic called the Influence Continuum that describes ethical influence and values of ethical religious groups, political groups, therapy groups, etc., all the way to what I referred to as authoritarian mind control cults model called the bite model of authoritarian control, thought control, and emotional control. And these four overlapping components are used to create a new identity that's dependent and obedient on the group. So, what people need to understand is that brainwashing is best understood as a dissociative disorder. And to explain it easily for your listeners, there was the real Steve Hassan who played basketball, wrote poetry, and liked girls. And then when I got programmed, I was told that Moon and his wife were my true parents. And I was given a whole new identity and belief system and code of conduct and language. And I was given phobias against thinking negative thoughts against the group or phobias that terrible things would happen to me. So I just want your listeners to understand my model can apply to a single person over another person or to China, which is the largest political cult on planet Earth at the moment that operates formal brainwashing programs within the brainwashing cult. When my book agent asked me to write The Cult of Trump, I said no, because I'm not political. Basically, I'm a mental health person. But in further discussions and considerations, I knew because I grew up literally 1.3 miles from Donald Trump's childhood home in Flushing, Queens, New York. I knew Donald Trump as a malignant narcissist my whole childhood, just from the news reports on him. And I knew that that was the stereotypical profile of cult leaders. So when I was offered this opportunity to write the book, that was my starting point, was I knew he was a malignant narcissist. But in my research for the group, I learned that there were actual authoritarian cults that were controlling Trump as well as bringing their members to follow Trump as a figurehead. So the thesis of my book is really trying to help the public understand that ever since Edward Bernays and his 1928 book Propaganda, that was used by Goebbels and Adolf Hitler, there's been an evolution in the understanding of how to manipulate minds, how to brainwash people. And so my thesis in the book is Trump is a result of many decades of evolution of psychological understanding and manipulation. And my life work is helping people to have a framework to understand this mental illness that's reversible, but it needs a very specialized kind of approach.
So we get into this sort of religious, political, religious, where I think you said you're not a person really with a political background. Now, what about the evolution of a lot of what you've done, where some people have suggested that some of your approaches in terms of religion, that you're being, for lack of a better word, overly critical, and that maybe in some cases your mind control or brainwashing theories don't necessarily apply to certain religions or newer religions.
So there's lots to say there. I believe in God, and I belong to a Jewish community and have for almost 3 decades. So I'm not against religion or spiritual practice at all, but I think legitimate religions give informed consent. In other words, you know up front who they are, what they believe, and what's expected of you before they ask you to convert, before they ask for money and your time to go away to an isolated retreat, etc. And I believe that any legitimate religion, especially Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, uh, believe in the notion that God didn't brainwash Adam and Eve, however you want to understand the Garden of Eden story, God didn't brainwash them to be zombies. They had free will and chose to disobey God. And the whole notion of religion, it was about following out of faith and also out of love and helping others. Whereas mind control cults are really it's really better understood as a version of MK Ultra, which was the CIA's early research into brainwashing people to become assassins, that was mirroring the Soviet Union's mind control research. And it turns out that I was a whistleblower when I got out of the Moonies for a congressional subcommittee investigation into Korean CIA activities in the US that used the Moonies. And when I read the entire investigation, I learned that the CIA had helped set up the Korean CIA, that there were two unsuccessful coups in South Korea. They were worried about North Korean brainwashing. So they picked a proxy group with Sun Myung Moon at the head to do counter brainwashing in Korea. And it was only when Americans said we don't want to be in Vietnam and there were widespread protests, the people involved with the Moonies said, let's bring them to the U.S. and put them on college campuses to oppose the communists who wanted to take us out of the Vietnam War. That's when I got recruited. So I very much have the perspective that I was an MK Ultra 2.0 or 3.0 victim. And what is a fact is the any government has never said publicly, yes, we know how to brainwash people, we know how to hypnotize people, and people are all vulnerable to this. So the average citizens walking around believing they're invulnerable to it, thinking only stupid people or uneducated people can fall victim of a mind control cult, and it's just not true.
Okay. It's interesting how so much part of the sort of the whole Trump revolution is so tied to Christian nationalism. And I mean, this is inherent within the Republican Party. Where it flies in the face of reality is the fact that in many ways, Trump the man is anything but a Christian. I mean, if he has pretty much broken every of the Ten Commandments, he is not what you would think of as a religious man, a holy man, a Christian. Whatever you want to say about Joe Biden, he was a practicing Catholic.
Right.
I'm not going to get into the where's or how's or whatever the case may be. So why is there no sort of bewilderment among followers of Trump who identify themselves as evangelical Christians? They just don't see this, or they choose not to. I mean, they look at him as a Messiah. They look at him as a religious figure. They
Right.
talk all the time about the Bible and Jesus Christ, and they're against abortion and so many things that evangelical Christians hold dear. But yet Trump possesses none of these characteristics. And although lately he claims he's had somewhat of a conversion, he's never said, I'm this religious person. I mean, he doesn't go to church. He's
Right.
been married how many times? I mean, I could go on and on and on. The
Right.
lying. I mean, so what is the story with that? Because some of us, we look at that and we can't understand it. What is it about it we don't understand, and what is it about these people that they can't understand that you're rooting for the wrong team?
So, this is part of the thesis that I wrote about in The Cult of Trump, that there are actual authoritarian cults that are his puppet masters who bring their followers, and they're using him. They claim he's a King Cyrus figure. In chapter 7, I talk about Putin and Soviet Union recruiting Donald Trump as an asset. So one of the major puppet masters. But another important cult is called Opus Dei, and Opus Dei is behind the SCOTUS hacking of the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation Project's 2025, according to the UK financial journalist Gareth Gore's book on Opus Dei. And I should say, oh, as we're recording this, it's after Pope Francis passed away, and there'll be a conclave to elect the next pope. The Opus Dei in the United States is busy lobbying, saying that Pope Francis was satanic and too liberal, too woke, and they want to put an Opus Dei Pope in place, go back to the Latin Mass, etc., and stop all this nonsense about ecology and global climate change and this nonsense about, not condemning gays to eternal damnation and other practices. But the biggest single group or network of mind control cults, as I wrote in my book, is called New Apostolic Reformation churches, and some of these are mega churches. And what distinguishes them from legitimate evangelical churches is that they have self-appointed people who claim to be apostles or prophets who speak directly to God, and they claim they have gifts of the Holy Spirit to speak in tongues and cast out demons and do faith healings. And they use behavior, information, thought, and emotional control to program their followers to believe they're in a holy war, that they're spiritual warriors, and that anyone who opposes them and Trump are demons or satanic. So when their apostle says Trump won the 2020 election, don't believe the courts, don't believe the news, don't believe all of Trump's former officials, including William Barr, who's an Opus Dei involved person, or even Chris Krebs, who Trump appointed to monitor the election. The cult leaders of NAR, and there's 30 to 40 million Americans in these groups. And parallel or overlapping with these groups are what's called Seven Mountain Dominionist Christian nationalists. And Mark Burnett, who did The Apprentice, is involved with that that movement, I should add. So they groomed Trump to be perceived by the public as a successful businessman, which he was never, and a genius, which he is not. But then we can talk about other religious cults that are in the cult of Trump. One that I'll just mention briefly is called the Family. Many cults, including my former cult, was called the Family, but this one does the national prayer breakfasts for decades. And I recommend Jeff Charlotte's two books that he wrote on this cult group, as well as his Netflix series called The Family. And what was unique about this cult was that they recruited not only Republicans, but Democrats into this cult. It was born of the anti-communist Cold War era, but they kept going. So the point is that people need to understand this is more complex than a simple thing, that there's a psychohistorical context to understand what's happening today. And I interviewed Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets about Craig's book, American Compromat. And Yuri was a KGB official at the time that the Soviet Union recruited Donald Trump. And when you think, why isn't the media talking about Russian involvement? It's a really good question. Why aren't they? My answer is that it's too fraught to go into. Although when you listen to Trump saying, "I trust Putin and not the CIA, the FBI, and Homeland Security" back in Helsinki in his first time as president, or you read the Mueller report and they talk about Russian involvement in his election in 2016, because the counter messaging is so strong about Russia hoax, Russia hoax, Russia hoax. Nobody wants to give it any credibility that this really is a coup that's happened, and
Yeah.
Russia really is actively taking over our government. We know from a whistleblower that when Elon Musk went into our most sensitive computers, one of the IP addresses he was downloading information to was a Russian IP address. And it's like how many specific things need to fit this picture for people to wake up and realize what's going on?
And speaking of American media, you're listening to WUSB 90.1 FM. And our guest today is Dr. Stephen Hassan. He's the author of The Cult of Trump and many other books on mind control. This is really a fascinating conversation. You know, it touches on so many things. There's so much to talk about. You've compared Trump in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, to people like Jim Jones, David Koresh, Sun Myung Moon, L. Ron Hubbard, is a fascinating uh, individual to me. Correct me if this quote is not correct. Is he said something to the effect of, "If you really want to get rich, start a religion."
Yeah.
And this place between sort of politics, religion, and money. I mean, it becomes very like we can talk about so much of this in this sort of abstract and talk about it in the ways that you talk about it from somebody with your background, but sometimes it really does just come back to sort of the old Watergate axiom, you know, follow the money. I mean, ultimately, why are these people? Why do they want to control people? Let's separate the sort of Manchurian Candidate kind of thriller aspect of it. And at the end of the day, I'm always a believer of people are doing what they're doing for power, number two, money, number one.
Yeah, I would flip that and say power number one, money number two, and sex number three. Not always, but usually. And it's a very interesting thing. So I did chapter three of The Cult of Trump, comparing Trump to my former cult leader, Sun Myung Moon, to Jim Jones of the People's Temple, who murdered 900 people, including a congressman, and Hubbard of Scientology. So, and I should say the term malignant narcissist was coined by a social psychologist, Eric Fromm, when he was analyzing Adolf Hitler. And how can we characterize Adolf Hitler? And what I've learned as a mental health professional is that people who become narcissists, especially malignant narcissists, the latest understanding is that they had an attachment disorder in their earliest years of childhood where they never got to develop a healthy sense of self and healthy bonding with mother or father or caregiver. So their whole life is about what's called compensatory, narcissistic supply, because they have a hole in their sense of self. They need people to constantly admire them and praise them, and they have a need to have power over because they just never felt truly loved in their essence and raised in a healthy way developmentally. And Trump was raised in a cult of Norman Vincent Peale This was part of his programming to believe that if you believe you're great 100% and don't allow doubts, then that's going to manifest into reality. And we've heard of The Secret, we've heard of the law of positive attraction. This is all related to the same notion, as well as prosperity ministers who say, if you believe it, then give me more money and you'll be blessed and more money will come to you too. So the point I'm trying to get at is that we're looking at disturbed people. Very small percentage of the population are narcissists and malignant narcissists, but they take up a huge amount of bandwidth of what's going on in the world, whether it's a Putin or a Xi or any number of other cult leaders. And the average citizen just wants to be happy and raise a family and have a fulfilling job. And they really are oblivious to the darkness that these perpetrators, these criminals are putting on us, with the exception that Donald Trump has now taught the world what a malignant narcissist is about, and his behavior is very predictable.
So I know you've mentioned that Donald Trump's rise is through Russian recruitment. Um, would you, in your opinion, describe the entire rise of the global far right to be a result of Russian recruitment?
Oh, absolutely not. No. Um, so this is a longer, deeper exploration of history, but going back in time, there were very deep wounds and identity wounds in America, especially of the Civil War, between the slave owners and the freed slaves and the North. And especially, a lot goes back to Roosevelt and the New Deal and bringing the dollar off the gold standard, where a group of very far right people like the Kochs, who father was involved with the John Birch Society, they just didn't like secularists and liberals and didn't like government regulation, etc. So there really is a lot of forces going on in terms of how we got to where we are today. But in terms of Russian involvement, the Russians also recruited another cult figure named Lyndon LaRouche, who ran for president 8 times, who was also a convicted felon, friend of Roger Stone, also, I would add. Um, but the Soviet, remember, again, it's a lot of powerful forces, and I don't claim to know everything. Trust me. My specialty is psychology of how the mind can get hacked and how to help people get better. But I'm curious to understand more about how we got to where we are today. And there are now, and I didn't put this in the cult of Trump, there are the Musks and the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses who want to have a competing world domination model to the Christian nationalists, extremists, where they believe in AI, and they believe in ideologies like long-termism, transhumanism, accelerationism, and crypto. So Bannon hates Musk, and there are all these dynamics going on for who's going to control what on planet Earth. In the meantime, all the fossil fuel countries and corporations did a deal to put Trump into power, and he's systematically getting rid of any scientific evidence of global climate crisis and even tracking weather and letting people know when a tornado's coming their way, because these fossil fuel countries and corporations don't seem to understand that we're all on one planet and they're destroying our habitat for everyone out of greed and power and wanting to make more money. Yes.
So you talk about your specific work being in the field of deprogramming or helping people escape prior brainwashing. Imagine for a moment you were uh, being asked to help a family right now, deprogram someone from their involvement in Trumpism. What would you be saying to them? Would be some of the tips and techniques you would offer them on how to reason with their relative?
Yeah, that's the key question and why I've agreed to do this interview, frankly, because I want people to understand this is not a permanent mental illness that's irreversible. A lot of people are in the media say that the people who are brainwashed will never, come back to normal. It's just not true. I can say what doesn't work is trying to argue with logic and facts, attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the policies of the cult of Trump, because that activates the cult identity to be defensive and to perceive you as the enemy. And that's what most people tried to do and then got exhausted because it didn't work and the people doubled down. And many people blocked or muted or stopped interacting with family and friends and coworkers because they were so frustrated and felt so hopeless. What does work is for people to first learn about my influence continuum, the bite model, and understand that what works is instead of a persuasion approach, a reality testing approach. In other words, the most effective technique is to ask a good question with warmth, with respect, with curiosity, and with active listening skills, and to have understand that there's a formula that works to help empower people to reality test for themselves, and people will exit themselves, not by you telling them they have to get out or the group's bad, but getting them in touch with the reality that there are other mind control cults. And with MAGA people, they will almost universally say, yes, China has brainwashing programs. And then you can have a discussion. Oh, so tell me what your understanding of what brainwashing is. Would you like to know Robert Lifton's 8 criteria of brainwashing, as he wrote in his 1961 book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, or Margaret Singer's 6 conditions, or Steve Hassan's bite model of authoritarian control, which is based on those models? That's a topic. Or talking about pimps and traffickers, because most people in the cult of Trump, especially those who are recruited through QAnon online and other conspiracy online psyops, they're against traffickers and pimps. And my work has been applied by labor trafficking experts and sex trafficking experts. So you can talk about brainwashing and mind control, give them tools to reality test. And then the follow-up question is things like, tell me your first memory of Donald Trump, and wait. Let them think about it. Oh, I remember seeing that he was cheating on his wife, his pregnant wife, or whatever, or I saw him on The Apprentice. Tell me, what was your reaction when you first saw Donald Trump? When you ask it in a warm, non-threatening, curious way, people will often remember back and they'll say, oh, I thought he was an ass. or I thought he was an arrogant. I mean, they literally tell me these types of words. And I don't go, aha, I got you. No, I say, really, that's fascinating. Tell me more. Tell me
Okay.
how you went from that first impression to now supporting Donald Trump. And listen. Oh, I listened to Fox News, or I was listening to Alex Jones or Steve Bannon or this or that, or I read this book or that. And so you find out what affected that person because everybody has a different formula of how they got inducted. Many people got recruited into one of these cults. They went to church and they had this wonderful warm experience and they didn't know that the leader was going to say, I speak to God and you can't trust your conscience or your common sense anymore. But remember, the vulnerability is to talk about a different group, not what they're in. To get them, have you ever watched the documentary on Scientology? Oh, yeah. Tell me, what did you think about people signing a 1 billion-year contract to work for Scientology? Oh, I thought they were nuts. Well, how could somebody believe that? Have you ever talked to people who are exited, who signed that contract? And you get people thinking. That's my whole work.
What happens? Give me the model of communist China because I feel as though, as far as most people on the left, I might be a little more anti-China than many of them. Uh, so I like that you're mentioning that model. With the model of communist China, tell me how it works when not just a religious leader or someone who you can just so happen to stumble upon wants to brainwash you, but what happens when your government is putting all of its resources and authority into changing the reality around you?
I'm not sure what the question is. Am I talking about Chinese communist brainwashing models
Yes,
or
yes. Let's talk about communist China brainwashing models, and then I'll get to possibly a little further
I
down the
don't
path.
have a lot more time, unfortunately, because we've done 45 minutes already. I'll go till 3:30, but this is
That's all I can do either.
way longer than the point is there's a lot to discuss here. So Lifton described from talking to people exiting Mao's thought reform programs 8 criteria, including control of environment, milieu control, which I talk about behavior control. He talks about sacred science, that the ideology claims to be not just scientific, but also the ultimate moral vision. In other words, a closed system of belief which is superior to everything else. Loaded language, which are thought terminating cliches. And we know from how the mind works. If you can control language, you can control thoughts. So I put that under thought control. There's dispensing of existence. If you're in the group, then you deserve to have rights. And if you leave the group, anything can be done to you, including killing you. That's just a few of the 8. But what I want to add in that's different about the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s is we now live in a digital world where people are online 8 to 12 hours a day. And in the United States, because we don't have any data privacy legislation, all of our activities have been tracked, collected, put on the dark web, and with AI, profiles have been developed. And my understanding and my research is there are 5,000 data points on every voting American. And they know what you like to eat for food. They know what car you drive. They know if you're married or divorced, etc. And they are nudging with the use of high supercomputers they're nudging people to become more extreme on the left, more extreme on the right, or make people uh, apathetic and give up and just, play video games for the rest of their life or binge watch videos or want to kill themselves. We're living in this realm where people need to come back to their bodies, come back to the here and now, realize being in real life is what humans are used to in our entire evolution, and that false reality, artificial reality, is not reality. I mean, I'm talking to you now over Zoom. I'm looking at pixels of your faces, but we're not in the same room, which is a great thing because I'm able to convey my thoughts and my experiences to you. But on the other hand, it's not real life. It's not where we used to be, where I'd sit down and do an interview in person.
My last question, and then I'll let Steve take from there. Do you see any indication that the Trump government in its current administration is attempting to use government resources to brainwash?
Absolutely.
Can you name an example?
Well, the biggest example is Doge and Elon Musk and all of the information channels that have been developed by right-wing forces, including Sinclair Media. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but I wrote about them in The Cult of Trump. They're packaging news to all these smaller communities, and it's all very contrived, very specific propaganda and people need information in order to know what's going on. And if you're not hearing more balanced, nuanced, fact-based journalistic information, you're going to be persuaded that what's happening isn't real. And I come back to Trump has signed over 100 executive orders in the first 100 days, all of them out of Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which I understand was an Opus Dei document to basically, change America from the progressive, human rights based rule of law, separation of powers of our government to an authoritarian fascist state.
And we're talking to Dr. Stephen Hassan, the author of The Cult of Trump. I'm Steve Matteo. Trevor Christian is here. Just if you could just quickly maybe go through this. So there's kind of 3 points here. One is, did you think Trump would win the first time? Did you think he would win the second time? And where are we going? I mean, are we just going to go through 4 years of this guy and then he's going to go away? Or maybe at some point, maybe he doesn't make it all the way through for whatever reason, or the Republicans lose power in the midterms? Or so if you could just go through those three stages.
So I did an interview in August before the first election where Trump was elected, and I said that when I was interviewed, I said I'm most worried about Donald Trump, and I thought that he would be elected, and he was. And I was afraid he would be reelected again. And I don't want to be grim, but I also believe in being realistic. And we have seen a recent executive order that is saying in the next 90 days, Trump wants the authority to declare martial law and use the military domestically, which is not part of the Constitution. He's taken inspector generals of our military and fired them. So for people to think we're going to have a 2026 election or a 2028 election, I just don't think that's going to be happening. That said, nobody knows the future. And I'm hoping for some, brilliant people to come forward and to, you know, start listening to what I've been trying to say and other of my colleagues who've been trying to say this is a coup, to name it, and to actually organize strategically for what we're going to do to get out of this mess. But at the moment, the opposition to the Trump government has been reactive instead of proactive and strategic. And it's going to take, I'd say, 20 to 50 years for us to get out of the mess that's just been created. And we don't want to go back to the corruption that was put into place by the Supreme Court and their so-called Citizens United, which is doublespeak, by the way, because it's about giving dark money and corporations rights of humans, which that has so corrupted our political system. We need a new system that's more representative democracy, that includes things like universal health care, and and people being able to have livable wages. And the other thing that is coming down the pike, aside from global climate crisis, is AI. And some of our top officials who've been working on it are saying this is not a tool. This is what's coming in the next few years are sentient agent like AIs. And who's to say that they're not going to see us as an infection?
Hmm.
It's
So
very grim.
I don't normally play the optimist, but we see in these first 100 days, I mean, Trump's poll numbers are just disastrous. And we see so many people who voted for Trump who have unbelievable buyer's remorse. We do have a Senate and a Congress where the Republicans are in control, but their majority is super slim. And
Right.
we also have a Supreme Court that now I think realizes that Trump is going after judges. And let's face it, these guys have pretty big egos, even though they're in bed with him and the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
So having again, I'm not usually the optimist, but given some of those things, what could be some of the other possibilities? Because we want to leave people with this fascinating interview with some hope. You seem like a hopeful person. You are a realist, but I always want to. We wouldn't be doing this program if we didn't feel there was some sort of hope.
Right. So I think the key is having hope. Even Viktor Frankl, who survived 4 concentration camps, he said what helped him survive was hope. Wanting to do his work, see his wife again, and the determination that he would not let the Nazis, no matter how they abused him, take away his ability to control his own mind and his own reactions to things. And I would like to state categorically the human spirit wants to be free. People don't like to be lied to and abused and exploited. And I agree with you that I predict there'll be millions of disaffected Trump supporters in the coming weeks, not even years, because people are losing their jobs. A lot of Trump voters and believers are now out of work. Vets who voted for him, farmers who have had their subsidies taken away by USAID. But the key is going to be embracing them, welcoming them instead of saying you should have listened to us, and turning them on the GOP people, listening where they have to listen to their own constituents, and encouraging these politicians' families to have discussions where they may be afraid of not getting reelected. But after all, what kind of world are you going to give us, dad or mom? So that's my hope, is that we can mobilize an educated group of people to understand how not to buy into the binary all or nothing. And I'll add one more piece as we're wrapping up. I think it's a big mistake for people like Bernie Sanders and AOC to demonize all billionaires as oligarchs. I think that's a Mao talking point. Not that there aren't at least 63 billionaires who've aligned in the cult of Trump, but there's a 200 other billionaires who aren't. And we need people with resources and influence and power to to combat what's happening. They just don't know what to do. So I think we need to be more nuanced. I think we need to be more inclusive, and we need to avoid authoritarianism on the left or the right and focus on rule of law, human rights, practical things as we go forward together.
You bring up a good point about the Democratic Party because they do seem very split right now. There is sort of the one side wants to be very middle of the road, almost Republican light, and then all the way over on the other end you have Bernie and AOC and people like that. What is the answer for the Democrats? I mean, who is the figure? Who are the people that need to emerge, or does one side or the other need to just tweak their message or their position or platform?
I'm not a political person, and this is all new for me, but it seems to me like we need to realize our system has been corrupted over decades. There is no such thing as free speech. The law was very clear. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire. That principle needs to be applied to hate speech online, etc. The lies are lies, and people need to be held accountable, which the purveyors, the Zuckerbergs, etc., and the Musks don't want to be responsible for the harm that they're causing. And I think we need to not have a message where we want to go back to the corrupted system in the past, but come up with a new vision for how we're going to live together on planet Earth and think about planetary survival. We have China wanting to influence the world. They're taking up all the relationships as the US withdraws. They're going to have more and more influence. Do we really want to live in a world with China surveilling us and telling us what we can think and do, or be sent to brainwashing programs?
Mm.
We don't.
Okay, so I think the last
So,
question. Oh, sorry.
um, I wanna cut it off. I know Stephen talked about needing to go at 3:30. So do I.
Yep.
Um, Thank you so much, Stephen Hassan, for coming on the show today.
Yep. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and good luck for
Thank you,
all of
Stephen.
us. Yeah. Take care.